See, my presentation today has a very simple message, which is that the MDGs and the SDGs are global goals. That's it, okay? Now, it's not a new idea. In fact, Jan van der Mortela, who was one of the people in the UN who translated the Millennium Declaration into a set of goals and targets, said as early as 2004 that the MDGs were being misunderstood as national goals and that they were actually global goals. I listened to him, and so throughout my writing on MDGs since that point in time, I have been thinking of them as global goals. And Sakiko Fukuda-Pa has also kind of now written quite eloquently about the problems which arise when global goals are translated into national planning targets. So the idea which I'm going to present is not new. It's simple in itself, but I think on the other hand, it's very, very difficult. Because in order to think about MDGs and SDGs as global goals, you have to start thinking about development globally. And we are trapped within national frames of reference. Our modes of explanation explain national trends by national policies, national factors. Our judgments of social justice are rooted in domestic national frames of reference. To make this transition from thinking about development nationally to thinking about it globally is quite complex, and I think quite a lot of misunderstandings arise. And what I want to do in saying that MDGs and SDGs are global goals, I want to try to make this transition from a national to global frame of reference. I'm going to try to do it in 3 steps. The first step is to ask were the MDGs global or national goals. The second step is to look at what are global goals. And the third step is to look at some implications for SDGs. Now this 3-step move is like a sandwich, okay? And the meat is in the middle, where in the model of global goals, where I'm trying to put forward elements of a theory of global goals. And the purpose of the theory of global goals is to help navigate through the blizzard of information which we face. I'm sure everybody in this room has received millions of emails about the SDGs and what they're about. There's lots and lots of stuff which is going past us. It's like lots and stuff, and how you make sense of all this is really difficult. And so the purpose of the model is to try to help make sense of it. Anyway, let's start with were MDGs global goals or national goals. And I'm going to start each of these sections with an image. And this is my first image. And this one is actually for Franklin Obeng-Udum, who is a visiting research fellow at UNRISD at the present moment, who is writing a critique of urban economics and urban planning. And he has stressed in our internal seminars in UNRISD that there are 3 million people a week becoming urban citizens in developing countries. So this, for Franklin, is an image of Accra. and it's by a Ghanaian painter called Awuli, and I'm not sure what it connotes to you. It might connote need. For me, it connotes potential. Can you imagine the creative potential and the ingenuity of the people living here in Accra to survive, and what would happen if all this creative potential was released because they didn't have to use it up in meeting their daily subsistence needs 14, 16 hours a day. So essentially, when we're looking at goals, we're trying to transform this situation. Now, what I believe is that we know in broad terms what countries need to do, poor countries need to do, in order to reduce poverty in a multidimensional and substantial way. You can think about what those are. I try to think of them and reduce it to a set of 8 national goals. So these are 8 national goals through which a poor country can reduce poverty substantially and sustainably. Now, this is based on existing experience. And what my 8 goals are, and I'll just read them through quite quickly, is that you promote high growth and you increase investment, savings and exports as a share of GDP. Secondly, you have to increase agricultural productivity, and you've got to provide adequate food supplies for both the agricultural and non-agricultural population. Thirdly, you have to promote the growth of formal opportunities, employment opportunities outside agriculture at a faster rate than the total population growth. You have to import, learn and adapt foreign technology. You have to strategically integrate into regional and global markets, both product markets and factor markets. You have to promote an early demographic transition and ensure that the urbanization rate is not too fast. You have to manage distribution for social cohesion, use social policy for productivist ends, and you have to build a developmental state with popular engagement in a shared national development project and close government-business relations. Now, those are 8 national goals which I believe represent a synthesis of the wisdom of what the most successful countries have done in order to reduce poverty, both multidimensionally and sustainably. And I believe this is known. This is something which is known. Countries do it. And the countries who know about it, they pursue policies which follow those goals. Now, you may disagree with it, okay? So you can be thinking, what if we want to do it? What should those 8 goals be? But let me just say one further thing about these goals. One thing about them is environmental sustainability is missing from the list, okay? So that's a big problem. That's not in there, okay? So, the people who were doing this in the past didn't pay sufficient attention to resource issues. But the second thing about it, as these goals, I haven't put them into targets, but you could translate these things into targets. But if you did it, the thing about the targets is that they are systemic and evolutionary. They're not targets which is the more you get of the thing, the better it is. Okay? So that, for example, if you increase investment as a share of GDP, it means something different than if you increase investment as a share of GDP and exports as a share of DG. It's a systemic thing. If you do just one, okay? And the same thing is evolutionary. So that if you do something at one point in time, it's wonderful, and if you do it later, it's bad. Or if you do something too early, which you should have done later, it's bad. So that, for example, you might want to upgrade your export structure or your industrial structure into more capital-intensive goods. But if you do that too early, when you've got a lot of surplus labour, then it's not going to work. Now, because these targets are evolutionary and systemic, one consequence of this is that current economic analysis cannot identify these goals, because the current economic analysis tries to create correlations between growth and particular variables. But if it's systemic and evolutionary, you find no patterns. You cannot find any patterns. But another thing about it is that these are not like MDG targets, which are linear targets. Now, as I said, these are my 8 national goals. You can think around it, you can, jump on it, play around with it, extend it, think what they are, but these are 8 MDGs. Now, these are so far removed from national development goals. These are so far removed from national development goals. The question is, what are these? What are these things? Okay, what are they? And now, as part of the national development goals, you might want to do universal primary education, but there's no way you would imagine you'd only do universal primary education and not secondary education. And there's no way you'd imagine you'd do primary education and not think of employment opportunities. What's going on here? What are these things? Okay, so you can change my national goals, but so what are these things? Now, in my view, they are global goals. And they are global goals of 2 kinds, or 3 kinds. They're global goals of 3 kinds. And these 3 kinds are, firstly, they are global public goods. So the goal of promoting environmental sustainability is a global public good. The goal of reducing communicable diseases is also global public good. Now, the second type of goal which is in there is what I call rights goals. Now, this is my own personal terminology, and people who I talk to about it object to it and say it's not right, but I still think it's right. Now, what the rights goals are, they're goals which are mapped on the outcomes which human rights seek to achieve. So that an extreme poverty goal, or a universal primary education goal, or an access to water goal are somehow mapped onto human rights. Now, they're mapped in a very odd way. They're mapped in a very imperfect way. Okay, so I'm not saying that they're perfectly mapped. But what they are their outcomes which are associated with a minimum dignified life, a minimum standard of dignity in life. And if you make progress towards universal primary education, access to water, you are making progress towards the outcomes of these human rights. But of course the goals are not rights in themselves, because a right has an outcome aspect, but it also has a structural and a process aspect, which is to do with the kind of the treaties and the legal internalization within national institutions. And it's those structural and process aspects which makes these objects of rights claims. So when I say that the second type of global goal is a rights goal, I'm not saying that they're rights, but they are outcomes which human rights seek to achieve. And then the third type of goal is a global partnership goal, which is a kind of a very odd animal in the MDGs, because in some sense it's regarded as a means. So it's a goal which is a means. So it's a funny thing, and it remains a funny thing. Anyway, if you see the MDGs as global goals, this doesn't mean that global goals are bad. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't pursue global goals. But the central issue, the achievement of global public goods is a good thing. The achievement of these rights goals, however imperfect, is a good thing. But the question is, for a country, how does it articulate the achievement of the global goal with the achievement of the national goal? And so we've seen my 8 national goals. The problem then becomes, how does a country articulate the pursuit of these global goals with these national goals? Now, in order to achieve global goals, they have to be internalized. There is no way you can achieve a global goal unless it is internalized within the country itself. But the question then is, how does this internalization take place? How does these global public goals and rights goals get articulated with the national development goals? Now, if we look what happened in terms of this process of translating global goals into national goals, if we look at the experience of the MDGs, what you see is, in practice, it was in the least developed countries and low-income countries that they were most strongly internalized. And in fact, there was a strong donor push to integrate these global goals as national planning targets. The donors were much less influenced in the middle-income countries, so they did much less. And for the donors themselves, the MDGs are associated with an increase in aid flows, but the goals remained underfunded, and they were very reluctant to have their policies quantitatively monitored or put into some kind of universal peer review process. So the implications of that is that the poorest and least powerful countries undertook the most effort to achieve the MDGs. In internalizing the MDGs, the LDCs and LICs adopted policies which diverted them from the policies which have historically delivered substantial poverty reduction. And this happened partly because global goals were defined in a way that they applied most to conditions in the poor countries, but partly because the MDGs were misunderstood as national goals. So in document after document, you see the phrase, national goals are the primary responsibility of the individual countries themselves. So that brings me to the end of my first section, but I think what I hope through that we've been able to shift from thinking about the MDGs as national goals to thinking about them as global goals, which need to be internalized in order to achieve them. Now, the next move I want to make, and let me signal it with another image, and this is from a Mozambican painter called Malangatana, and it's called Primavera Radiosa, which is radiant spring. And Malangatanga is sometimes he's been called the Picasso of Africa. And essentially what I want to signal here is we want to change perspective. We want to try to start thinking globally. And what are these global goals? And what I'm talking about, and just to fix in our mind what a global goal would look like, I've put 4 up there, okay, which can be models of global goals. Stabilize greenhouse gas emissions at a level that prevents dangerous climate change, agreed in 1992. Reduce adult illiteracy in the world by half and end gender disparity between 1990 and 2000, which was agreed at the World Child Summit at 1990. Does anybody remember that goal? Does anybody remember the goal, the adult literacy goal? Here's another one, very important one. Halt the loss of biodiversity in order to ensure that by 2020 ecosystems are resilient, which was agreed in 2010. And then at the bottom, the flagship MDG goal, reduce extreme poverty by half between 1990 and 2015. So what I want to do is I want to try to construct a model of what global goals are. Now, you can do this in various kinds of ways, but the approach I've taken is modeled on a book by Charles Bates. And Charles Bates is a philosopher who's written a book called The Idea of Human Rights. The Idea of Human Rights. So what I'm thinking of is the idea of global goals. Now, what Bates' book uses is what is called a practice-dependent approach to justice. A practice-dependent approach to justice. And this is, for me, one of the most exciting new areas of social science literature. So that there has been, since the early 90s, an explosion of thinking on global justice and what global justice means. And within this literature, some people look at it in abstract terms and think, okay, well, what is our norms of global justice? But others have said we should focus on existing practices like human rights or the WTO and try to look at norms of justice for these existing practices. And this is a kind of practice-dependent approach to justice, which Bates uses in his book, The Idea of Human Rights. Now, in this practice-dependent approach to justice, what you do is you look at the practice. Okay, so you look at the practice of formulating and implementing global goals. MDGs, climate goals, biodiversity goals, SDGs. And you try and abstract from that to create a model. And then you use the model to then do a critique back of the practice. Okay. Now, this methodology is not totally, it's a new kind of approach, new methodology. So there isn't a kind of standard practice. But to give you an example, when Bates looks at human rights, his approach to the question, what are human rights, is to say, what would a participant in the existing discourse of human rights understand herself to be committed to if she were to acknowledge such a human right existed? So you're not thinking of the human right as some kind of abstract phenomenon which is kind of rooted in, natural rights theory or, some discourse theory. You're looking at what the participants in the actual discourse are doing and trying to figure out what are they committed, what is the human right to them, okay? So what I'm trying to get at is, what are a global goal to the participants in the discourse if they are acting in good faith? What is a global goal? What kind of actions does a commitment to a global goal imply, and which agents have responsibilities? What kind of norms arise? Now, in constructing this model, because the practice of global goal setting and implementing is so new, I think a key feature of the model has to be disagreements and the nature of disagreements. And so what I'm trying to do, as well as construct a general model, is to look at the nature of disagreements. And then finally, because it's such a new practice, I think it's riddled with pathologies, which is kind of public misuse of the practice. And so I'm trying to identify those pathologies. So that's my method. And as I said, it's practice-dependent approach to justice. And this is what I come to when thinking using this method. It is the global goals are collective intentions of the international community of states to achieve high-priority future global outcomes which protect and promote common interests and common values. Now that's quite a, it's quite a long thing, and it took me a long time to kind of arrive at this place. But the critical thing about them is that they are collective intentions. Now, an intention is a desire which the agent is committed to achieve through action. A desire which the agent is committed to achieve through action. And what I'm saying, therefore, is when participants in the discourse of global goals act in good faith, they are not specifying their wants, they are specifying collective intentions. Okay? And that these collective intentions are to achieve high priority future global outcomes which protect and promote common interests and common values. Now, all of the terms in that statement, we can talk around those. We could talk around those for a very long time. When I use the phrase international community of states, I'm not saying it's a kind of a full community, and we'll come to that as what type of a community it is in some sense. The term global outcomes is quite important because this is for that you need global facts in order to monitor outcomes, global outcomes. Global facts are things like the number of people living in poverty, the number of people not going to primary school, and so on and so forth, the level of inequality in the global economy. And finally, you've got common interests and common values. So the question is, what are those common interests and common values? And what I've put down there is human dignity, equality, and equity. So what are the global goals? Now, essentially, what commitments? I said it's a desire which the agent is committed to achieve through action. So the next question is, what is the commitment which then arises? Now, essentially, I believe it's a commitment to cooperate. Global goals are a shared responsibility of states. In both identifying and pursuing global goals, states can enlist the support of non-state actors, but the primary responsibility for their achievement lies with the states themselves. And global goals commit states to action both at national and global level. So at the national level, they have to refrain from policies which undermine their achievement. They have to make appropriate efforts in domestic policies and make appropriate efforts in foreign policies. And then finally, global goals commit states to establish and support international institutions of various kinds, which are listed at the bottom. Associated with the global goals is a set of norms, and I think you can identify a few norms which seem to be general within the practice. And as time, I've been told, is running short, I'm going to just skip over those, but you will see in them, for example, number 4, the burden of achieving the goals should be fairly shared. All states who have agreed to a set of goals should participate in action to achieve them. There's also more capable and well-resourced states should aid states which are not able to do their part. I think these norms one can identify within the practice. I want to move quickly to disagreements because I think this is very important. And there are various forms of disagreement, and one could start to build quite a big house on this kind of structure of collective intention. But what I want to focus on is, what is the nature of the commitment to cooperate? What is the nature of the commitment to act together to achieve these high priority global outcomes? And in order to kind of refine the model here, I've gone to another set of literature which I think is extremely important, which is something called the philosophy of sociality. Now, this literature has also, like the literature on global justice and the practice-dependent approach, has emerged since the early 1990s. And what the people in this literature are trying to do is trying to think what it means to act together, what it means to have collective responsibility for something. What does it mean to have collective beliefs? And so this literature is actually a literature which is rebalancing our understanding of the world away from the excessive individualism which we've been bathed within, towards a more balanced approach. So in this literature on the philosophy of sociality, there are different positions. It's a very lively area, but there's quite a strong distinction between some authors who speak of what I've put here as I-mode collective action, in which the collective action is an aggregation of individual intentions to participate together to achieve a shared goal. So each of them has personal intentions to achieve a shared goal. To we-mode collective actions, in which by making a joint commitment, a we is created, which acts as a body to achieve a goal. Now, two of the key people in this literature is Michael Bratman and Margaret Gilbert. But what one arrives at from these different positions are different conditions for collective action. And the important point is that within the we mode, what happens is that social obligations arise. And so on the basis of these two approaches to understanding collective action, you can actually get two different models of global goals. Now, one model of global goal is a partnership model, and the other one is a social contract model. And in the partnership model, everyone is acting. It's an aggregate of individuals, each of whom is participating on their own account, individual states participating on their own account to achieve the global goals. In the social contract model, states agree to act as a body to achieve global goals. In the social contract model, the joint commitments are social obligations which each party owes to everyone else. In the partnership model, the commitments are just questions of practical rationality. You have made a participatory intention, and then it's a question of your self-governance that you follow through with this. In the partnership model, no one owes anything to anybody, but you can have increasing forms of mutual assurance which increase social stability. In the social contract model, all parties have a standing in relation to each other which gives them the right to demand actions that conform to the joint commitment and to rebuke or shame the other for not so acting. So we have the idea that global goals are a collective intention. The intention is a desire on which we are committed to act. Okay? But then this commitment can take two forms, one of which is a partnership model, one of which is a social contract model. Now, I've got a list of pathologies there, which I've got no time to go through because
you can have 3 more minutes.
I can have 3 more minutes. Thank you, my friend. Thank you, my friend. Anyway, one can identify certain pathologies which one can, you can see if this is happening now. Global goals are agreed but misdescribed as national goals. Global goals are agreed but set at a level which implies that states do not have to do anything about them. Okay, this is the kind of thing. Global goals are agreed but some people don't participate in the agreement. There are various pathologies which arise, but I think the bottom line in relation to the two models is that the partnership model, in my view, is more prone to pathologies than the social contract model. This last image is something called the Mouvement des Peuples. Okay, and this is by a Senegalese artist, and he says Le Mouvement des Peuples shows all those men, women and children who in today's political and ideological chaos dream of a haven of peace and dignity. Okay, Le Mouvement des Peuples is an active engagement for a different consciousness of time, love, and utopia. Okay, so as we come out of, these are the words of the artist, okay, so as we come out of that model and start applying it to SDGs, let's think of that's words and the people looking for the haven of peace and dignity. Anyway, I wanted to start this last section. I started the first section by looking at national goals. I'd like to start the last section looking at global goals. And I said global goals focus on global outcomes. So please have in your head, what are the key global outcomes which you would want to see in a set of new SDGs? What are the global outcomes? What are the facts? Okay, so I've just put a few down here of the key global facts which we might want to alter. Okay, so these are things like 40% is the percentage of the world's population living on less than $1 a day, 2.7 million people. Okay, the poorest 40% of the world gets 4% of the world income. The third one, I can't walk over there, but I'd love just to walk over there to the third fact, because it's a very, very important one. It shows GDP per capita projections till 2030 for high-income countries and developing countries. And what you see is the gap growing wider and wider. And the GDP per capita in high-income countries projected to grow by $25,000. That's a lot of stuff, okay? That's a lot of stuff is going to be related to that. Global demand for renewable ecological resources equals 1.5 Earths at the moment footprint. The global overshoot day, that's the day in the year when we've consumed all our resources, has gone from early October to August 19th. We want to stop the temperature going more than 2 degrees Celsius temperature of global atmosphere. A safe global carbon budget is 565 gigatons, and if we use all our fossil fuel reserves with available technology, we're going to put 2,795 gigatons into the atmosphere. So if you're thinking of global goals in my terms, you would start playing around with these kinds of numbers and think, where do we want to get in 2030? In fact, what we've got is this, okay? We've got this set of 17 goals. Now, I don't want to disparage these 17 goals. They're very important. This is what we're going to work with. These came out of a long negotiation, and they're there. Are they global goals? Are they national goals? What are they? They're based, for me, they're founded on a misunderstanding in some sense, in which some people are going into there and said the MDGs were too social, and we want to add an economic dimension, and then we also want to add an environmental dimension, and good national development should have this. Anyway, that's beside the point. These are what we have got. This is what we're going to be working with. The question then is, and this is, I suppose, my bottom line in my last 3 minutes, is that in applying these global goals which we've got, these new goals which we've got, we should take account of knowledge about the nature of global goals and the norms which are associated with them in order to implement these things in a way which avoids the problems of the MDGs. So these aren't my desired set of goals, but this is what we've got. But the central issue then is, how do we implement them? And so we come then to these issues which are arising about what is universality. And what you see is, in fact, what is happening is that the emerging approach to universality is actually doing away with the global goal nature of the global goals. So targets are defined as aspirational global targets, which each government setting its own national targets, guided by the global level of ambition, but taking into account national circumstances. You find this, the exactly same thing is happening in the climate change goals. You have governments make their own bids. You have the global goal, but governments make their own bids. So they're being kind of mistranslating. The global goals are getting lost in translation. There is a major debate about common and differential responsibility, and I think the model would suggest that common and differential responsibility should be a central principle of SDGs. It should be a central principle in the sense that there should be an ex-ante understanding of the distribution of responsibilities, the sharing of effort to achieve the goals. I think a number of developed countries are resisting the idea of putting common and differential responsibility in there, but I think there's no doubt that global goals are a common responsibility, and I think within the practice the fact that it should be differential is well established. I think the difficult issue is whether the sharing of the effort should not simply be based on capacity and resources, but also ex post facto responsibility. That's the costs of alleviating a problem should be distributed in proportion to a party's share of responsibility for causing the problem. So I think in the Rio meeting and the way that CDR is used there, it includes this ex post facto responsibility. And in injecting common and differential responsibility into the SDGs, I think it should be there, but the question about what place does ex post facto responsibility take is a difficult one. Every single document emphasizes a partnership approach, and it seems that there is no alternative to a partnership approach. And this partnership approach is also being extended to talk about multi-stakeholder partnerships. In terms of the model, we're stuck in I-mode cooperation. We haven't moved out of thinking of this as an us trying to achieve a shared goal, and that there is an alternative. The model would say that there is an alternative, and the model would also say that the alternative is superior. And then finally, we come to accountability mechanisms, and there's a lot of talk about accountability mechanisms, but everything that I've read about accountability mechanisms in the existing practice shows that they're going to be soft, and that there's no way that you're going to get a hard accountability mechanism in the SDGs. But the model also says that in order to get a stronger sense of global social responsibility and mutual accountability, we need to shift from I mode to we mode. So in terms of accountability, the mode is more important than the mechanism. And then finally, I've got a quotation, and this quotation, I'll I'll just read it out. Since men, it's an old quotation, so it's not politically correct. It's very, very old. But since men cannot engender new forces, but merely unite and direct existing ones, they have no other means of maintaining themselves but to form by aggregations a sum of forces, so that their forces are directed by means of a single moving power and made to act in concert. So does anybody know who said that? It comes from Geneva. It's Jean-Jacques Rousseau in The Social Contract. And so what I think is happening is we're actually moving to more intense cooperation. And in the future, I believe it's inevitable that we will move from I mode to we mode cooperation. But I'm not sure where it's going to happen. When we're going to have an aggregation so that it's a single moving force made to act in concert. Maybe it's going to happen by 2030. But anyway, I think we've got to think of moving in that direction. Thank you.